Good morning. It's April 22nd, 2020, and we are talking about our sources here in Nowhere Village right now. We're on a greater journey called the coordinates, and the coordinates is a 9-part inquiry process where we ask these really big questions about life and how we fit into it. And I originally was going to do it 1 coordinate per week and have decided we're actually going to stretch it out. So each coordinate will get 2 weeks, and this feels appropriate for such huge questions and themes. And so you have another week to dive into a bunch of the quotes and resources that I gave you guys last week. There's all sorts of resources you'll be able to find with this video for those watching. And anyone who's live, of course, just let me know if you're having trouble finding anything. I've been working really hard to try to organize the site and make everything very easy for you to find, but I'm on my end and you're on yours, and so I do need feedback and information from you if that's not working. So here we are in week 2 of exploring what our sources are. And I really, really encourage you to just keep digging in and using the resources all the sources that I've been offering to you. This week's talk will be diving into the same themes as last week, but a little different, a little less text heavy, and just kind of an expansion on what we've been talking about, and a little bit of personal and sort of application, more practical concerns as well. So I said last week that the first few coordinates ask us specifically to look at our relationships. And because being a human being means always being in relationships, being part of life seems to mean always being in relationships. And until we can learn a little bit more about ourselves and how we approach relationships and how we relate to not just other people, but the rest of life, until we can sort of acknowledge that life is relationship and we're always in relationship, until we can acknowledge that and kind of work at that place, life can really feel like a real war. And so focusing on our sources as the very first coordinate has been important to me. I have changed the position of them, as you can imagine, over the years, and source being here feels really, really right. Acknowledging our sources, honoring our sources. This is a really important word for me that I'm using throughout the coordinates, that I use a lot, this word honor. It for me encapsulates the spirit of right relationship. And that to honor something, to me, I see to honor something, if I really look at, if I just get really plain about my language, and I really like to do this, and I encourage you to do this too, especially if you're a word person, get really plain about it. Like, what does this word mean? What do I really mean when I say this? I've done this with all of the really important words that I share with you guys, that all of the important concepts that I talk about, because it's too important for me to just go around kind of using these words, assuming I know what they mean and assuming you know what I mean. So when I break down this word honoring, and I just think about it really plainly, common sense. I see that if I'm really going to honor something, I first have to acknowledge it. I first have to accept it as it. And that, what usually gets in the way of that, of course, are my ideas or my preconceived notions about it, or about how we're supposed to relate. And so the first step in honoring anything is to let it be what it is. That's my belief. You could have a different one. But so if I walked in the door and you wanted to honor me, and you started, I don't know, you went into like a whole prayer for a particular deity in a language I didn't know, this could be a really meaningful offering for you. But if the intention is actually to honor me when I come in, does it do that? I don't know, right? It might. But I guess what I'm saying here is to honor something or someone first means that we're going to let it tell us what it is. We're going to let it reveal to us what it is. One of my really important source texts, you'll hear lots about this, is the Yoga Sutras. And in the Yoga Sutras, he basically talks about this as Patanjali talks about this as essentially the definition of samadhi, or the enlightened state, is when we're going around the world and the world is revealing itself to us. And that means that the world is doing it. I'm the witness, and I'm not going in and manipulating the world or changing the world or saying, you should like this. Don't you like this? I'm going to honor you with this. You like it? Right. Instead, the honoring is it has to begin in a much more receptive place, which is why meditation is the beginning of all of our practices in Nowhere Village. And as I said at the end of last week's talk, we live in we've been living in a very overly young culture. We've been honoring the young, and we've been, in many ways, denigrating the yin. And the yin is that sort of receptiveness, that ability to just kind of back off and observe things as they are. And then when we back off and observe, and we're not forcing things to be something they're not, then they get to reveal what they are. And within that information is information about how we can be in right relationship with them. There are different types of beings, and there are different types of experiences. And to really honor anyone starts with this, just listening, letting it be what it is, letting it show itself, reveal itself to us. But then often there is some sort of response. There is some sort of more active part that we are going to play in our relationships. And when we do, remembering that the actions we take in different directions should be appropriate to those directions. I know a lot of what I talk about seems super obvious. But again, if we kind of break down what we've been using and what we've been taking for granted, if we pivot toward it and kind of break it down, in my experience, there's all sorts of goodies in there. There's all sorts of treasures and revelations and gifts. And so the first three coordinates are sources, scions, and friends. And these are three different types of relationships. It doesn't mean that we can't have all three types of relationships with one person or being. We could totally do that. The same way that I can be teaching right now, and then I might, I don't know what a good example is, but I don't know, I might go and go study Sanskrit with my teacher, and then I'm the student just for a really simple example. We wear these different hats and we play different roles. And with that same teacher, if there's something I can help him with, right, I might start to become a source for him, and he would be my scion. So we haven't talked much about the scion piece yet. That's just the word that I chose for those beings for whom we are sources. And so my sources are where I go, when I need. And my scions, when they need, come to me. At least I'm on their team, you know, of beings that they come and source from. And our friends are, if our sources are sort of like a source of power, like I'm thirsty, and so I need to go to the well. And I go to the well and I draw from the well. Ah, thank you, Will. I needed that. When somebody else is thirsty, you know, I don't serve liquid as much as a well does, but you know what I mean? I serve other things. I serve other energies and resources. And when someone needs those, they come to me as a resource. And so it, you know, we're really talking about power when we talk about sources and scions. And we're learning how to be respectful of power. We're learning that it is important to realize that we are the child of life, of nature, of our actual parents, our human parents, of a society. We're the children and the ancestors of the teachers of these teachings and of all the practices we do in our movement sessions and our, you know, we are the benefactors. We have a lot that's been offering to us. And then we, of course, there are others for whom our job is to pass that along. Power has become this kind of dirty word, I feel like, in like a contemporary left, you know, I don't know, like liberal culture, power, you know, associated with the 1%. And I think that's really unfortunate because having financial resources and land and political power, as the 1% does, as the sort of the very, 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 very few humans sitting kind of hanging out at the top of this pyramid of material power, political power. I think it's really unfortunate for us not to realize that that's just you know, a few important, but a few important egoic material. It's just one plane and it's one version of power. And there are others, and we need to be in good service to ourselves by recognizing all the power that we are innately connected to, even those of us who don't have those kinds of massive resources. I'm just going to go ahead and assume that my audience here doesn't. So those of us who are in that situation, the 99.9%, you know, really, really important for us to recognize what powers we do have and the powers that to take away that negative connotation with it and to make sure that we remember that we are powerful. And that we are imbued with power by our sources. Now, last week I talked about the Tao, the original source, darkness within darkness, from which everything comes, the great womb. And, you know, he says, all things issue from it and all things return to it. And so you and those who have a lot of more material resources or other kinds of power that we call power on this planet, on this plane, they all came from the source. They all came from the Tao. All of their resources came from the Tao, you know, and came from even more immediately this planet's resources. recognizing that these shared sources are sources of power, and learning how to relate to those in a way that, that acknowledges our direct connection to power. And then, of course, being respectful of our power over others. Next week, we're going to talk a lot about compassion, a lot about how we treat those who have less of power. And of course, there's lots of kinds of power. And so, again, if somebody, if I need to go to somebody for financial support, for instance, but they can ask me for some emotional support, I'm good at that. Then we have something that looks a little more like a friendship. And so this is the third coordinate, which of course we'll talk more about soon. But in our friendships, we take turns being sources and scions. We take turns acknowledging each other's gifts. And we take turns saying, I need help. I'm thirsty. And I know for me, just acknowledging that my own thirst, my own yearning, my own desire has been something, my own incompleteness has been something that's been very, very, very hard. And so here we have this paradox of contemporary spiritual life, but I think this paradox is always true. The paradox of being interconnected and being independent at the same time. And so this is an interesting thing. I think it's interesting. In order to honor something, we name it. Namo Namaha, and we name it. That basically means, greetings in Sanskrit, Namo Namaha. You say it at the beginning or the end, coming or going. And that nama, the name, the name itself means to honor, basically. The words are the same in Sanskrit, essentially. To name you and to call you out from the whole. So that's interesting. It's an interesting paradox. I'm almost saying you're not whole. I'm calling you out of the whole because I'm naming you. And the Tao Te Ching, in one of the quotes that I give you, I think I gave it to you. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. So as long as I can give it a name, it's temporary, it's personal, it's a personal source. I talked about personal sources and universal sources last week, right? It's a personal source. We've taken it actually from the wholeness. And that's okay. That's okay. And it's important because through the way that we relate to the source, we return it to wholeness via the relationship. And so these interactions we have with others, we're going to talk more about the kleshas, or the obstacles as they're presented in the Yoga Sutras. So important. Talking about fear, addiction, aversion. I may even be able to get into a teensy bit second in a little bit, but anyway, we talk about fear, addiction, aversion, ego, and our false beliefs. Whoa, right? And this is big stuff. In that experience where we don't feel whole, we learn from this text, and we'll learn from our practices that we experience fear. Because when we think we're not whole, we believe we're disconnected from source, we're not going to get our needs met. Then comes an addiction, hoarding, I need that. Or war, aversion, annihilation, right? I can't accept you, right? And then, of course, all those negative emotions that come with it. And so as long as we are stuck in this contemporary myth of individualism in a way that doesn't honor right relationship, we are in an impossible situation where we're told, be whole, be independent, be strong. And we disconnect ourselves from our sources of power. We forget to plug back in, and we forget to plug everybody else back in. And so this is what we're doing in right relationship. Okay, I'm going to show you this. It didn't turn out great, but you guys get the idea. It's a yin yang. And so when I say yin, which is usually considered the black, when I say yin, I'm naming yin and I'm calling it out from the whole picture, right? And when I say yang, I'm calling it out and I'm separating it. The whole symbol, the whole idea of the symbol is that they go together, right? And that when they come out of harmony, and when in our culture, it would be a lot more yang, it would be a lot more active, and it would be imbalanced. And you can kind of envision that for yourself. We experience that lack of balance, that disease ripple through every aspect of our lives. But for today, something in particular that I want to share with you is one way to look at the dots inside of each half of the yin yang symbol. I mean, these are reminders that at the heart of stillness is movement. Inside of any sound is silence, and vice versa. That at the heart of the masculine is the feminine, and at the heart of the feminine is the masculine. And here's just one way to look at that today. This, deep inside of the yang, this feminine is yearning to reunite and rebalance and reharmonize, to honor the feminine fully. It's a yearning to get back into right relationship with that which we don't have as predominantly inside of ourselves. But the irony is that yearning and that drive is a part of you. It is a part of me. It is a part, it's a really important part. And it's the part that keeps bringing us back to the whole. So inside of the feminine is that yearning for the masculine. I don't mean actual like genders. We can talk more about that if anybody has any confusion or questions, or if it rubs you the wrong way, the way that we talk about the feminine and the masculine in these traditions. Happy to address it. The point is, the thirst in its own way is the source of the water that we get from the well. That your own dissatisfaction, in a way, right? Your own needs, your own incompleteness brings you back to your practices, brings you back to source. People are so impressed that I meditate so much. I do it because I have to. I do it because the yearning inside for it, the fact that I need to get complete brings me back to my sources. It's not because I'm so much better than anybody else. It's because that I'm just acknowledging the thirst. And here's the little kind of like personal bit that I'm gonna add in here. I'm not sure exactly how this is all gonna come out, but So for the better part of a decade, my primary source was another person, and it was a partner, my ex-husband. And I remember when we first started doing, he actually introduced me to the original framework from which I developed the coordinates, which was we were planning on buying a farm, and we were doing this holistic land management, and it's asking you about what are your resources, where do you get your resources. And I did add another prompt for you guys, which does this, when kind of breaks it out. What are your material resources? What are your emotional resources? Intellectual, creative, and spiritual resources. That's you can find that. But as I was breaking down my sources in all of these different areas, I had one person really who was the main source for all of it, including my finances, including my material wealth. I was just a yoga teacher, and he was a tech guy, and I thought, kind of like this, that there was a balance there. I believed that, I think. But anyway, anytime that I do my coordinates, he would be the number one source, like all the categories. And there's so much that we could talk about here. But what I want to just focus on simply is I didn't do a good enough job, I think, at really letting it be an actual peer-to-peer exchange. And this is my own way of relating inside of myself to this source. Ended up coming to a place of great fear. One of our kleshas, one of our big obstacles. This experience over the years, I ended up losing access to my own power because I gave so much of it to this person. And it's basically the year anniversary of me deciding to move out. And this time last year was a very, very, very difficult time. There are a lot of his secrets sort of coming to light, and all these revelations that were, on the one hand, like, oh, that makes so much sense. I'm not crazy. This has been happening. But on the other hand, just devastating, heartbreaking, gut-wrenching things to learn from your partner of many, many years. And in the year since then, I have had to rediscover my gifts and my powers. And I've had many, 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 many moments, some of them quite recently, where I felt that yearning for support in a really deep way, that thirst, and all the accompanying emotions that can come around having a source really provide for you a lot and then be gone, and of course, all the reflections of my whole lifetime and how it all how my relationships to power and sources got me into the position that it did. And I don't even know where that's coming from, but that's okay. And what I've been sitting with recently is the fact that I am finally really getting over a lot of that negative emotional charge. And it's because in the interim, in this year, my own inner lights are coming on. I am learning such a deep amount of self-trust as I show up and I meet these challenges. And there was, there's sort of a part of me that wanted to say, like, I'm gonna make it, and it's gonna be no thanks to you, you know. But I'm actually finally getting to a place where I'm grateful for all of it. I'm grateful for all the resources all the ways he was a source for a better part of a decade and took very good care in many ways, made it possible for me to do this work. And then even feeling grateful for that sort of abrupt and scary, terrifying disconnection from those resources, because without that, without the challenge of it, I wouldn't have, without the necessity, right? Without needing to, I would not have. I would not have had to work as hard as I have, and I wouldn't have so much to show for it. And I would still be in this position where I felt underneath of a person who I was supposed to be side by side with. And that kind of putting them up on the pedestal was a denigration of myself in the way that I related. And so how can we relate to sources in our lives that are other people and that are the sun and the stars and the air? You know, how can we relate to everything that helps us, that provides for us, in a way that doesn't fall into the impossible situation I described earlier? I became what they call codependent, right? That's what addiction is too. It's the relationship to the source it's tinged with fear, right? It's scary, and then there's that clinging. And in the clinging, we say, gosh, I'm so unwhole, I'm so unfit, I'm so dependent. And then of course there's the opposite. There's the in the Yoga Sutras we call it Devesha, right? Devesha is the dividedness that says I'm separate. I'm just totally fine on my own, and I, you know, this obliteration of, or that pushing away of our sources of what can help us. How can we honor our sources in a way that acknowledges our innate wholeness? That acknowledges I am also the Tao. I am also the light. I am all of it. And then as I go through life, I recognize that I take turns in different positions of power. And I can fluidly move between those positions. I can make sure that the power that I do have is being used to help other people and to help the planet. And not just to get myself more comfort and privilege, right? That comes from fear. That clinging to the comforts and the privileges comes from fear. And so the hallmark of our relationship with our sources is trust. And the way that we honor our sources is by spending time acknowledging them, recognizing them, exploring them as we do with our prompts, like clarifying them, naming them, calling them out, pulling them out from the hole, and then putting them back into the wholeness with gratitude. And that exchange, I need you, source. Receiving, thank you. And that thank you is that giving back. And then of course we pass it on, right? Oh, look what source gave me. Do you need some? And so I'd like to close just by saying that I am in a new phase for myself of gratitude for my ex-partner and for the whole situation and for exactly how it went down. Yeah. Even with the shitty parts that I could still say, yeah, really didn't do a great job with that. But I can also say I'm grateful that it happened just like that. And to tie this all back to you and your experience, we are all in a really hard time right now. I had the rug pulled out from under me a year ago, and I feel like I was just getting everything back, and then sort of the rug got pulled out for all of us. So we're a lot of us have had our normal sources and resources taken away. Parents homeschooling, this is, you know, what a resource to be taken away from families. And then that adoption process is happening for all of us now. Because we can't rely on these other sources the way I've stopped being able to rely on my ex-partner. We're all going through that right now, right? When we can't rely on in these other spaces, we are going to blow ourselves away with how creative we can be. We are going to be so amazed by the sources that still are here. Some of them we just might need to, some skills, right? We need to build, some things we might need to clear. There's work to do. But we're young. We love doing work. We're okay with that, actually. Right? There's work to do. But this is to have a source or sources kind of ripped away from us and to have us sort of thrust out into the wilderness the way I felt like I've been kind of for a year. This is where we learn. This is where we build. This is where we do exactly what we have to do, and what we're going to come out with on the other side is going to be amazing. You are the source. You are the light. You are the power. And you're worthy of it all. You know what to do with it. Thank you for receiving that transmission with me. If anybody has any questions, please type them into the chat box, or you're welcome to ask. I'm now doing transcriptions of these too, so you'll see the transcription from last week up, and this one will go up as well.